Hello and welcome to Independent Podcast Service. I'm Paul,
And I'm Dave.
and this week we are discussing the episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker, Horror in the Heights. This episode originally aired December 20th, 1974. Let's start off with the number one film at the box office this week, Dave. Any guesses? Christmas of 74, what would you be going to see at the theaters? I'll give you a hint,
Very,
it's not a Christmas movie.
a very good question, but very tricky in my case since I did not exist at the time.
Well, neither did I, but I've seen this movie, and you probably have too.
Be questionable.
I'll give you a hint.
Immediately jumping to mind.
I'm going to give you a hint, Dave. It's a sequel.
Even with that, nothing is immediately jumping out.
Okay, I'm going to give you one other hint. It's a crime film.
Ooh. Might be the case of the one that we may have had last week, but also the case of I remember the one we had from last week because it's sounding similar.
Last week was Death Wish. It is not Death Wish.
Crime wise.
It's a much more respected film than Death Wish would be.
Duly noted, but also out of the particular film genre, crime films are not my forte.
Well, this week in 1974, you probably would have been lining up to see The Godfather Part 2.
Ah. Yeah, a series that I need to actually work on seeing.
Have you not seen The Godfather?
I'm sorry. There's many things on the schedule.
I just assumed you would have seen The Godfather, but okay. Alrighty, so let us move on to the number one song in America this week.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was something new, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it was still Kung Fu Fighting.
It is not still Kung Fu Fighting. It is a new song, and it's kind of an interesting choice for being the number one around Christmas time.
You know, with us nowadays of Christmas being starting essentially right now mixed in with Halloween.
Well, no, I mean, this is like, we're talking about December 20th, but I just mean like in terms of like the content of this song, it's kind of like, I guess it kind of makes sense, but it also doesn't.
Supposedly, you know, a decent percentage of the time, most people only hear the rhythm and whatnot and don't really pay too much attention to lyrics.
This is one of those songs where nobody paid attention to the lyrics, I think. So the number one song in America this week is Cats in the Cradle.
Okay. It makes decent enough sense. Yeah, it's definitely also understanding for the lyrics for it, but yeah, it also makes sense.
Yes.
And again, around in December when it made it to number one.
Yeah, that's the part where I'm kind of like, I kind of get it in some ways, but in some ways I don't. Like, I get that like people get nostalgic around Christmas, so maybe that's part of it, but it is kind of a weird choice for a number one right before Christmas.
Yeah.
Anyway, let us move on to the episode. So, this week, let us start off with the synopsis. So, to grow old and poor is rarely good, but it gets even worse when several of the elderly poor of Roosevelt Heights are killed, apparently by rats. Kolchak quickly discovers the rat story doesn't quite add up. And why is there an Indian restaurateur painting swastikas on the walls in a primarily Jewish neighborhood? When Carl puts it together, he discovers that he must be willing to kill someone he trusts in order to put an end to this menace. So, Dave, what did you think of this episode?
So this turned out to be a fairly interesting one, because on the one hand, touching on the particular subject that it sort of went about with the creature in the episode, some of the methods to protect about it, as well as the issue mainly brought up about it, it was kind of the case that, own sensibilities and whatnot concerned about it, but also needing to remember it was the 70s. It was definitely a thing, and there was a definite amount of concern about it.
Yeah, I actually think that They handle everything quite well in this episode.
Honestly, with most everything, it did turn out pretty much for what I expected at the time. It was spoken of, but definitely not in the case of, oh man, super ridiculous hate or concern about it. I think at the very most, it's the case of how some of the symbols were drawn and the proper placement of how the symbol is supposed to be shown.
Yeah, so okay, we're gonna get into this. So they obviously there are swastikas being used in the episode, which shockingly is offensive to a lot of people.
And
They also don't. I'm pretty sure that the Hindu swastika is supposed to be drawn differently.
there were some cases that sometimes it was facing the correct way, and some cases it was facing the wrong direction.
And I'm pretty sure with the Hindu one, you're supposed to have the like dots in the little areas.
Yeah, there's a version of it that has the dots included in it as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I also get that it is like 1974, and that probably wasn't as widely known as it is now. Like, okay, like I look at it as what they're trying, and they've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, in all respects. I had the concern of, oh boy, they're going to have a particular character involved within this, and whether or not it's either going to be super respectful is kind of, but as it turned out for the story, it turned out to be interesting for the story as it went, as well as decently respectful. But again, with Kolchak, they're fairly good with it.
Yeah, they are. That is one of the things for the show, especially considering the time period. Like, they are very good about not kind of being dicks when they're dealing with like other cultures and stuff. Like, they're maybe not perfect all the time, but like you can tell they're at least trying.
Well, as much as Kolchak wanted to get the attention of that particular store clerk within the episode, dear God, no wonder most people despise him.
He is annoying sometimes. But yeah, I thought this is actually probably my favorite episode of the series. Just because I think it's a really interesting concept. It's a monster that, like, I had never heard of prior to this when I first saw it, and I thought it was a really interesting concept for a monster.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think. Go ahead.
Not going ahead with your thought.
I just think it's a good episode. It does kind of deal with some social issues, and it's a fun monster. And Kolchak has a cool moment at the end where he kills the monster, which he doesn't do terribly often.
No, that's definitely true, and it's good to sort of see in that sort of case. I definitely sort of like with at least the dives that I've taken into that particular culture and its mythology, creatures, and monsters that it has within it. And especially with this one, holy cow, it would be tremendously difficult to manage with this one. But it was still interesting with the story of how to deal with it and the methods of fighting against it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely on whole with Kolchak's encounter with it.
Yeah, no, I think this is quite a good episode, and I think it's fun, and it's not. There's definitely you get a little worried when you're like, oh, we're going to be dealing with like something from like Hindu culture, and we're going to be dealing with like swastikas and stuff, and I immediately go like, ooh, in 1974, that's probably not going to be great, but it actually does come out quite well.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I quite enjoyed this episode. Alrighty, Dave. So if you have nothing else about this episode, next week we will be watching the episode Mr. Ring.
Mr. Ring? Like
Yes.
the wearing kind?
Yeah, Ring.
Okay.
So we've had Rakshasas, we've had Native American spirits, we've had Cajun boogeymen, we've had the devil, we've had all sorts of these other things, vampires, zombies. Next week we get a robot.
on the one hand, I should supposedly be surprised, but on the other hand, maybe not too much. It's also a bit of a case of how big the specific hi-fi idea of things was around in the 70s. Either if it was sort of building up to where it stands or was just sort of emerging and people were like, "Oh, look, this is new."
So they're gonna have. There's gonna. I'm gonna just give you a minor spoiler. There's gonna be an android in it, and it certainly is an android.
Okay, so just to be sure, to clarify for myself and supposedly the audience, android with how this is spoken is robot that looks like a human or robot that has mixed robot parts or human that has robot parts to them.
No, so it is a robot that is humanoid.
Ah, okay.
Although you would never confuse it for a human if you looked at it.
I suppose the question once I get to the episode is how far are we going to be diving into the uncanny valley?
Like, it has a humanoid body, but its face is not human.
Again, we'll just have to see if it's going to be looking over the edge of the valley or if we're going to be uh, diving headfirst right into it.
Oh no, yeah, it's going to be an interesting episode, Dave. It's not a personal favorite of mine.
I do not doubt, but whether or not it's just because of the makeup and costuming, supposedly, or if the story kind of falters a bit.
There are going to be a couple of cool little trivia notes for next week, but we'll get to them then. So,
Duly noted.
until next time, I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.